the Jewish people generally, but the RAC where you are specifically, have always cared immensely about religious freedom and church-state separation. You know that we're hearing a lot of what is not really religious freedom talked about in that way. Give me your sense of the status of religious freedom right now.
Sure. So a little bit of historical context. In 1993, we helped author the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. My predecessor and your beloved colleague, my beloved colleague, Rabbi David Saperstein, quite a hero in the religious liberty arena, at least the authentic religious liberty arena, working together across partisan lines. It was a bipartisan effort. It was an interfaith effort, passed what's affectionately known as RFRA, to protect religious minorities. That is to say, in the case of a Jewish person, that a Jew could not be discriminated against for wearing a yarmulke in the workplace. These were the kinds of concerns that we had. And for 2 decades, there was broad consensus that this really was an important protection of religious minorities. Well, some in the community, some people in the faith community, and some outside the faith community have decided to use what was intended to be a shield to protect people as a sword to actually damage people and harm them. And the best example, of course, is those who don't honor the equality of LGBT relationships, who would discriminate against LGBT folk in the workplace or their freedom to marry, who would claim that it would violate their religious freedom if they had to, for example, provide flowers at a wedding or act as a photographer. The current state of things is that this is really playing out on a state level, because the federal RFRA doesn't actually apply in the states. And so individual states have taken upon themselves, and some have passed excellent RFRAs that really reflect the federal protective statute. But North Carolina, classic, Indiana, some states in the last 2 years have passed hateful, mean-spirited RFRAs that are really discriminatory acts against the LGBT community.
And because of that, some people are looking at religious freedom as no longer important because it looks more like, as you said, a tool for attack. How do we regain the integrity of the language?
Yeah, really important. First of all, that people who are disposed towards social justice and progressive values need to talk about religious freedom and take back that language. We can't have religious liberty somehow become a kind of conservative talking point. It shouldn't be conservative or progressive. It really is about religious minorities, whether it's Muslims, Christians, or Jews, or any person of faith or a person of no faith, being able to practice with the free exercise. And that's what the Constitution provides for. And let's remember, the first right that's guaranteed is the religious right, the right to exercise freely one's religion. So we need to just defend that.
I know this afternoon you were in conferences talking about Jewish issues. What are Jewish issues?
Well, you would think immediately, often people, when they talk to the organized Jewish community, that we're most concerned with Israel or Jewish defense. We are, of course, and the Religious Action Center and the Reformed Jewish Movement are a Zionist organization that care about Israel and care about peace and justice with Palestine, or the Palestinian state, hopefully someday, two-state solution. But we're working, our top priority right now legislatively is around criminal justice reform and the Voting Rights Restoration Act. Many people may not realize that the original Civil Rights Act of 1964 was written in the conference room of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. It was a Jewish organization that hosted the Leadership Conference for Civil Rights. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was drafted in our conference room. Dr. King, when he would come to Washington with his colleagues, would meet in our offices and would draft these famous pieces of legislation. In 2012, terrible court case Shelby eviscerated the Voting Rights Act. After decades, by the way, of reauthorization by Congress, by bipartisan majorities. And civil rights legislation in our country has always been about bipartisan majorities and had been reauthorized, by the way, by Republican and Democratic presidents. Suddenly in 2012, the Voting Rights Act became a partisan issue. We're working very hard on restoring the Voting Rights Act. And because of our historic role in the civil rights movement and the incredible, painful moment in American history on racial justice, what we see in Ferguson, Baltimore, Cleveland, New York, and across our United States, to reach across lines of difference, to work with the civil rights community, with the African-American church community, to reach with the interreligious community, to fight for racial justice for all people.
One last question. Regardless of who wins the White House, if you could have a quiet conversation with the new occupants of the White House, what would you say to them?
First, I would invite them to pray, and I would invite them into the thousands of year prophetic tradition of the Jewish people, having been slaves in Egypt, that were commanded to see ourselves as if we ourselves came out of Egypt, and then demanded by the prophets to do justice and love mercy and walk humbly with God, because we are about seeing any human being who suffers, who is oppressed, as our own oppression or suffering. And so whether there's a Republican or a Democrat, whoever is in the White House, to take that sacred institution and to leverage it for justice for all people.
A really great answer from a great organization, and I wish you so much happiness in the work that you do.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a blessing. It's a blessing. Thank you.